If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on the Ritz. Hey, what's up, bookworms and my little science experiments? Dr. Frankenstein is back today to talk about 1818's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, as some call it, by Mary Shelley. Can you believe this? Oh, over 200 years old. Can you imagine having written a story that people are still talking about 200 years later? That is incredible. I mean, you want to talk about some legs. That's it right there, guys. So 1818, written by Mary Shelley when she was just a teenager. It was revised and released, actually, in 1831. Took a little while for it to get published. Lots of reasons for that. I'll let you look into that on your own. But here's the thing is that she had changed a lot since she wrote that in 1818. By the time it was 1831, I believe she had either divorced or her husband she'd been widowed. She'd lost a couple of children. So she was a little more jaded. So when she wrote it, she did a little bit of a revision to her draft in the 1831 version. That is the one that people most commonly have read. And I think the difference is here is it has a little more grim than the 1818 one. So of course that's the one we're going to talk about. So that's what I'm going to do. I read this for the first time, guys, when I was a teenager in 1994. It was right before the movie came out. Bram Stoker's Dracula had come out a couple years before. So they said, hey, we're going to try to do Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So I read this right before that. Up before that, I had no idea anything about the story of Frankenstein outside of Young Frankenstein. That's what the joke was at the beginning, in case you were too young to get that. I loved that movie, so really, I really only knew very, very minimal amounts about, just what pop culture was about Frankenstein and things like that. I mean, that was still back when I thought that the monster was called Frankenstein, not, Frankenstein's monster, So there's little things like that, but 1831, like I said, that's the one that was most commonly read. But let's go ahead and get into it, guys, like we always do, by talking about what is it about Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. It stars Victor Frankenstein. He's a scientist obsessed with generating life from lifeless matter. He subsequently manages to create a horrifying, sentient creature assembled from the pieces of stolen body parts. Now, he's shunned by society and faced with eternal isolation, and the creature becomes murderous with revenge against the one who brought him into existence, one Victor von Frankenstein. Yes, we go, guys. So it's a story I feel like everyone knows by this point, but I feel like the story has become a little misunderstood over the years. I talked about it a little bit when I did my classic books that I loved a while back, about how I think that the people are kind of missing the themes of this book, and I think that is a very, very big part of it. This is a book that I think, let's go ahead and talk about here. Good. What makes the book good or bad? Starting off good is I think it's the themes. The themes of this book are central to everything. I think there are so many themes in this book and allegory that the story kind of almost takes a back seat to what she was trying to get across to us. I mean, it has it all. The meaning of life, existence, science, revenge, compassion, forgiveness. Why are we here? Those kind of things. The biggest one, obviously, in the science is, should man play God? That's the biggest question here. And the way that she presents it is more than just, hey, he's a scientist and he wanted to prove that he could do it. No, there's a lot of questions about the morality of it, if it should be done, or if Victor's only doing it because people said he can't do it. I think that the one that sticks with me the most is basically how she points out how we as humans treat anybody who looks differently than us. Anyone who has a deformity, a disability, or say they're just, they live in poverty, things like that. How we look down on people that might be a little different from our social caste or standing in society. And that's one that obviously I think you can see just basically jumping off the page. So the monster immediately becomes like an outcast through society and by his own creator, sadly. So I think that abandonment is going to be a very, very big theme running through this book. The way that Victor just kind of disposes of him like it's yesterday's garbage, because he just didn't turn out the way that he hoped he would, is very heartbreaking. But this leads to the revenge angle of this book. And I really feel like this is kind of a revenge book in many ways. But Victor and the monster basically form like this chaotic bond in their need for revenge on one another. And it's through that bond that I think is what it gives the leak to humanity for the monster and his ability to eventually forgive Victor for these things. So again, there's so many more themes than there is in the actual story here, I think. You won't hear me say this about a lot of the books on this list. It's all about, the story is great, the characters are great, and it's not that those are bad. It's just the themes, and I believe a higher allegorical message that Miss Shelley is trying to get across here. And it's very clear to see from the time period that it was written. It's very easy to see some of the things that she's trying to say without just coming out and saying them, right? But I think what she was really trying to say is that in life, we're all born the same, and we're only kind of made different by our experiences. That's the biggest overall theme of this book, I think. And I know I've said theme probably about 45 times now, but it's hard for me to say anything different about this book because it really is. Like when I was going back and I was thinking about what made that book so memorable to me. Was it the story? Was it Antarctica? Or was it Arctic? I can't remember if it was Arctic. I can't remember if it was the Arctic Circle or if it was Antarctica. One of the icy parts, north or south. One of those. I couldn't remember if it was that. I couldn't remember if it was just the whole revenge plot, the back and forth, and seeing both sides of it. And then I started thinking about it. It's like, no, it's things like abandonment, it's things like revenge, it's things like destiny versus free will, stuff like that. And there's so many more that I could get into. I think I could probably come up with a dozen themes that I draw out of this book, but those are really the biggest ones. In my whole fear factor rating scale, I'll be honest, this is probably about a 4. It's going to leave some ideas in your head. Nothing scary, I don't think. It's one of those things where I think you think about the time period this came out. I mean, again, 200 years ago, imagine where we were in society. I think it's going to leave some things in your head, but it's more of what I just kept saying. A lot of these issues that I feel like she presents about society as a whole, as opposed to just the decisions that are made in this story. There are some bad things here I want to talk about, and I know I sound like a broken record when I'm talking about these books that are 100, 200 years old. It becomes quite obvious to you that the writing style might be jarring for you. It might be a little tough, especially if you're going from something that was written in like 2016 and then you flip to something that was wrote 200 years ago. It's going to be like, wow, that's a little bit difficult to read. So I hear a lot of people who try to read this and say, oh, it was just too boring. For me, it's not boring. It's not a story-driven kind of flip through the pages and I just can't put it down kind of thing. It really is very much a study on allegorical themes. And that's just, again, I know I keep saying that, but that's just what it is. So if that's something that you're not looking for, this might not be the one for you, I'll be honest. It has allegory in everything from Christianity to how society treats the poor and the disabled, but it's very, very slow. I'm talking like Moby Dick slow. So this isn't anything that just be like, some light reading real quick. This is one you're going to take some time with. You're really going to start to break down, and it's going to be very thought-provoking to you, and I think that you'll get a lot of things out of it if you try it. But again, if that's something that you're not looking for, probably not going to be for you. I think it's kind of a dry tale that is more about the messages than it is about the story. So if that's a bad, again, you might want to steer clear of this one. But I still will give you an idea of why I think that you should read it. I mean, number one is it is a classic for a reason. I know a lot of books that, I talked about this again in that same video, that a lot of books, they throw the words, or actually that was when I said it was classics that I didn't love. They throw the word classic around and you start being like, why is it a classic? Just because, some book retailers put it on some kind of a school reading list and said, hey, it's a classic. This one, I feel like it is very much a pillar of the science fiction horror genre. And there are many who claim that Mary Shelley is the creator of the science fiction horror genre. So, you got to give credit where it's due. And I think it's very much like a Dune or a Lord of the Rings, where it's something that you should read just because it is important that you read the pillars of this genre that you've come to love so much. I still put it under horror when you've got, obviously, a reanimated monster, but it does kind of fall under science fiction sometimes. And because, again, think about when this book came out. There was nothing else like this at the time. So, again, I think it's something that you deserves to be read by you. Just you need to have those expectations for what you're about to get in check if you really want to enjoy yourself with it. So my final thoughts here, I think that this is a book that's going to stick with you, just not in the way that you're expecting. You're not going to be like, oh God, remember that part where the monster came alive and I got scared? No, it's not anything that's going to stick with you like that. It's not going to be in your head because of some demented murder scene. It's going to stick in your head because you're going to look at this as euphemisms for things that we don't want to talk about in society as a whole, how we treat our disabled, how we treat the elderly, how we treat those who look differently than us. It really is very much putting that underneath the microscope and saying, you know what, this might not be right, and we need to actually take these things into consideration. And I think it's something that I had kind of the same feeling I had when I watched the Joker movie that came out last year. Is it just shows how we just kind of shuffle off our mentally ill like they don't, and just kind of hope they'll go away, just kind of sweep them under the rug. So I think that she was talking about these things before anybody was braving talking about things like that. So again, I think that this is a reason that you should read the book, because it has themes that stick out even to this day. So if you've only watched like the 20 or so dozen movie adaptations that they put out, none of them are like the book. They completely missed the message. I talked about that 1994 movie. It was fine. I didn't think it was as good as Bram Stoker's Dracula was, but I don't think anybody does. But it was fine. But again, I don't think it's probably come the closest. But I think it missed the whole message that is in this book. So guys, have you read Frankenstein? Do you want to read Frankenstein? Drop in the comments. Let me know, and I will talk to you guys there.